They thought they were sending her to die. A maximum security male prison, crawling with the most dangerous men in America, was no place for an innocent woman, let alone one the system had already failed. But what no one knew, not the guards, not the inmates, not even the warden, was that this defenseless woman had spent years leading the most secretive, lethal missions for the United States Army's Delta Force. And now, trapped behind bars for a crime she didn't commit, she was about to wage a different kind of war, one fought in the shadows of the prison walls, where survival meant being smarter, faster, and deadlier than everyone else. Asterisk, the year was 2023, and America's prison system was on the edge of collapse. Overcrowding had turned penitentiaries into powder kegs, with violence erupting daily. In the heart of Texas, the Black Ridge Maximum Security Correctional Facility loomed like a steel fortress on the outskirts of the desert, infamous for housing the country's most violent criminals. Inside, the air reeked of sweat, metal, and fear, yet it was not fear that ruled here, but power, traded like currency among gang leaders and corrupt guards. In the midst of this volatile environment, a grave mistake, or perhaps a carefully orchestrated betrayal, was about to send Commander Alana Briggs, a decorated Delta Force operative turned military trainer, into a nightmare she never imagined. Stripped of her rank, branded a criminal, and shoved into a facility designed for men who had nothing left to lose, she faced an unthinkable reality: survive among predators who saw her as prey, or take control before the first move was made. Against her, what none of them understood was that Alana had been trained to endure the unendurable. She had led rescue missions deep behind enemy lines, dismantled terrorist networks in the dead of night, and survived ambush where escape was impossible. Now the battlefield had changed, but her instincts hadn't, and for those who thought she was just another prisoner, they were about to learn that the most dangerous weapon in Black Ridge wasn't a shiv hidden under a mattress. It was her. Asterisk, the dry Texas wind carried the faint scent of dust and oil as Alana Briggs stepped out of her modest bungalow on the outskirts of San Antonio. The early morning light spilled across the quiet suburban street, painting everything in a pale gold hue. She stood still for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the silence settle over her like an old friend. Mornings were the only time she felt truly at peace, before the world started moving, before the ghosts of her past caught up. Dressed in running gear, her tall, athletic frame moved with an ease that belied the years of training, discipline, and battle she had endured. Her neighbors knew her as Miss Briggs, the quiet veteran who taught self-defense at the community center. They didn't know that once she had been Commander Briggs, the woman called in when the mission was classified, the target was unreachable, and failure was not an option. Her home was simple, a one-story house with walls lined with books and photographs. Some showed her in uniform, her lean face set in that stoic, unreadable mask soldiers wore in front of cameras. Others were more personal, her with her late father fishing in Louisiana, her mother laughing in a sunlit kitchen, her holding a folded flag at a military funeral. She lived alone now, the echoes of gunfire and the weight of loss her only constant. Companions. The military had given her a family once, her team, her brothers and sisters in arms. But the Delta Force was a world where survival meant moving forward without looking back. And yet, in quiet moments like this, she still heard the voices of those who hadn't made it home. Her life after service had been uneventful by comparison. She ran self-defense workshops for women, taught at the local police academy, and occasionally consulted for private security firms. The work kept her sharp, but nothing in civilian life carried the same intensity as being dropped into enemy territory under cover of darkness. She told herself she didn't miss it, but a part of her did. The part that thrived on danger, on solving problems when everything was against her, on walking into a room knowing she was the most prepared person there. That morning, she jogged to the community center, where a group of women in varying athletic wear awaited her. Some were survivors of assault, some were young professionals looking for confidence, and others were simply curious. Alana greeted them with the same firm warmth she always had. Her teaching style was direct and uncompromising. She didn't sugarcoat the reality of violence. If someone puts their hands on you, she told them, you have 3 choices: freeze, flee, or fight. Freezing gets you hurt. Fleeing can work, but not always. Fighting, if you commit to it, ends the threat. Her voice carried the weight of experience, though she rarely spoke about the specifics. The truth was, most of her operations were still classified. After class, she stopped at a small diner she frequented, run by an older couple who treated her like family. She ordered black coffee and scrambled eggs, scanning the news headlines on her phone. Political corruption, corporate scandals, another violent prison riot in the Midwest. It was all the same noise. But one headline caught her attention: FBI cracks down on arms smuggling ring. The article mentioned arrests in multiple states. A criminal network supplying weapons to cartels and extremist groups. It was the kind of operation she used to dismantle in the field. She barely noticed the man sitting 2 booths over, pretending to read a menu while glancing at her in the reflection of the diner's chrome napkin holder. That man, Agent Lucas Kincaid, had been shadowing her for weeks under orders he didn't fully understand. The file on Alana Briggs was thick, but the recent additions to it were troubling. Her name had surfaced in connection with a shipment of illegal arms intercepted at the border. To Kincaid, it made no sense. Briggs was a war hero, a decorated officer, but orders were orders. Someone high up wanted her watched and eventually taken down. Alana felt it. Years of fieldwork had honed her instincts beyond the point of coincidence. The glances that lingered too long, the car parked across the street 2 mornings in a row, the faint sense of being followed in the grocery store, she noticed it all. She didn't confront it yet. In her world, revealing what you knew before you had proof could cost you the upper hand. Instead, she filed it away in the back of her mind, going about her routine as though nothing had changed. That night, she sat in her dimly lit living room, a single lamp casting a warm glow over the worn leather couch. She was cleaning her old service pistol, not because she needed to, but because the ritual calmed her. Every motion was precise, methodical, the way her instructors had drilled into her decades ago. As she worked, her phone buzzed with a text from Maya Reynolds, a former teammate and one of the few people she still trusted. Need to see you. Urgent. Alana's gut tightened. Maya was not the type to dramatize. They met in a quiet park after dark, sitting on opposite ends of a bench like strangers. Alana, Maya began, her voice low, something's wrong. Your name came up in an investigation. They think you're involved in weapons trafficking. Alana's eyes narrowed. That's insane, Maya nodded. I know. But it's coming from the top. Someone wants you out of the way. Alana's mind began connecting the dots, the surveillance, the strange looks, the shadow of her past mission suddenly looming larger. In her line of work, enemies weren't always on the battlefield. Sometimes they were in boardrooms, in offices, or sitting behind polished desks in Washington. And sometimes, the most dangerous battles were the ones you couldn't see coming. She went home that night with a knot in her stomach, sensing a storm on the horizon. What she didn't know was that in less than 2 weeks, she would be pulled from her bed in the middle of the night, handcuffed, and charged with crimes she didn't commit. And instead of a trial that would clear her name, she would be sent directly into the lion's den, a place no woman should ever be, and certainly not one the system had wrongly condemned. The Texas evening was warm, the kind of heat that clung to the skin even after the sun went down. Alana Briggs sat on her porch, a cold bottle of water in hand, listening to the hum of crickets and the occasional distant bark of a dog. It had been a long day, 3 back-to-back self-defense classes, a quick stop at the police academy to finalize next week's training schedule, and a grocery run that somehow turned into half an hour of small talk with her neighbor. On the surface, it was just another ordinary Tuesday, but under the calm veneer of suburban life, Alana felt below. Steady burn of unease that it wasn't paranoia. She'd lived too long in a world where ignoring your instincts could get you killed. The feeling had been growing for days now, like a shadow stretching longer in the setting sun. She'd caught sight of the same black sedan more than once during her errands, lingering just long enough to register before disappearing. At the community center, she'd noticed a man in civilian clothes pretending to use his phone while watching her class. And earlier that afternoon, her email inbox had been flooded with strange, empty messages, just subject lines with no text, all sent within minutes of each other. She had no proof these things were connected, but in her experience, coincidences were rare. Her phone buzzed on the arm of her chair, breaking the quiet. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in years: Captain Aaron Holt, once her commanding officer during a joint Delta Force Sky-A operation in Iraq. Holt was a man who rarely reached out unless it was important. She answered on the second ring. "Briggs," his gravelly voice came through, low and urgent. "I can't talk long. I don't know how deep this goes, but your name's on a watch list. High priority." Alana's grip tightened on the phone. "For what?" "They think you're involved in moving military-grade weapons through Texas into Mexico," Holt said. "This is coming from Homeland Security and the Bureau. Someone up top is making sure the paperwork looks airtight. I tried digging, but I was shut out. My advice? Lawyer up now." She glanced at the quiet street, her eyes narrowing. "Aaron, I know," he cut in. "But this isn't about what's true. It's about what they can make people believe. Be careful, Alana." The call ended abruptly, leaving her staring at the black screen. Holt wasn't the type to panic. If he was warning her, it meant she was already in the crosshairs. Alana went inside, locking the door behind her. She retrieved a slim black laptop from a desk drawer and booted it up. Within minutes, she was accessing encrypted communication channels, running searches through private security databases, and scanning for any mention of her name in connection with arms trafficking. Sure enough, buried in a report filed just days ago, she found her name listed alongside known smugglers and gang leaders as a facilitator with military access and logistical expertise. It was a fabrication, but it was dressed up with enough technical jargon to sound convincing. Someone had been careful. Someone had been planning this. Her thoughts immediately went to the few people who could have pulled something like this off. It wasn't just about framing her. It was about making sure no one questioned the story. Whoever it was, they had resources, reach, and the ability to manipulate official channels. The sound of tires on gravel made her freeze. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain just enough to see a white van idling 2 houses down. Its headlights were off, and she could make out silhouettes inside 2 in the front, at least 1 in the back. She knew the look of a tactical vehicle when she saw one. Her instincts screamed at her to move. She shut the laptop, stashed it in a hidden compartment under the floorboards, and grabbed the go bag she always kept ready, a habit from her years overseas. Just as she slung it over her shoulder, a hard knock rattled the front door. "Ms. Briggs, this is Special Agent Lucas Kincaid, FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door, please." The voice was calm, authoritative, and exactly what she'd been expecting since Holt's call. But what struck her wasn't the presence of the FBI, it was the speed. Less than an hour after the warning, they were here. That meant they'd been watching, waiting for the moment to move in. She considered her options. Running would make her look guilty. Fighting would escalate things fast, and the last thing she wanted was a shootout in a quiet neighborhood. But surrendering without a plan meant stepping into a system already rigged against her. 5 seconds. "Ms. Briggs," Kincaid called again, his voice sharper now. Alana set the go bag down slowly, exhaling through her nose. She wasn't afraid of being arrested. She was afraid of what would happen after. But one thing was clear. The game had already begun, and she was playing on someone else's board. She unlocked the door and opened it to find 3 agents on her porch, their jackets marked FBI in bold yellow letters. Kincaid stood in the center, a tall man with a square jaw and unreadable eyes. "Alana Briggs," he said evenly, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to traffic military weapons across state and national borders." The words were delivered like a script, but the flicker of something in his gaze doubt maybe told her he wasn't fully convinced of the charges. Still, he motioned for her to turn around, and the cold steel of handcuffs clicked into place around her wrists. As they led her toward the van, Alana caught sight of the neighbors peering from behind curtains, their faces a mix of curiosity and disbelief. She kept her expression neutral, but inside, her mind was already working. She'd been in worse situations. Before, situations where one wrong move meant never going home. The difference now was that the battlefield wasn't a desert or a jungle. It was the American justice system, and she was walking straight into its trap. The inside of the white van smelled faintly of disinfectant and cold steel. Alana sat on a bench seat, her wrists cuffed in front of her, a black nylon strap securing her to the wall. 2 agents sat across from her, both stone-faced, both avoiding small talk. She recognized the type, disciplined, trained to see suspects as cases, not people. The drive was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Through the narrow, reinforced window, Alana watched the quiet neighborhoods give way to the industrial outskirts of the city. Her mind cataloged every turn, every landmark, an old habit from years in hostile environments where knowing the route could mean survival. When the van finally stopped, the back doors opened to reveal the looming facade of a federal building. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as she was escorted inside, through metal detectors and past rows of locked offices, until they reached a small, windowless interrogation room. The air inside was cool and stale. A metal table sat in the center, flanked by 2 chairs on one side and a single chair on the other. In the corner, a camera's red light glowed faintly. Agent Lucas Kincaid entered last, carrying a slim folder. He didn't sit immediately. Instead, he stood across from her, studying her face like a chess player sizing up his opponent. "Ms. Briggs," he began, his tone almost conversational, "you've had an impressive career. Delta Force Commander, multiple deployments, commendations for valor. Then, after leaving the service, you train law enforcement and civilians in tactical defense. On paper, you're the kind of person we should be working with, not arresting." Alana leaned back in her chair, her cuffs clinking softly. "Then why am I here?" Kincaid flipped open the folder, sliding a glossy photo toward her. It showed crates of military weapons stacked in the back of a cargo truck. A shipping manifest was stapled to the corner, bearing her name in block letters. "Because of this," he said, "we have customs logs, shipment records, and multiple witness statements tying you to 3 illegal weapons transfers in the past 6 months. She glanced at the photo, then back at him, all fabricated. "That's a bold claim," Kincaid said, but his eyes flickered again just for a second. "Not bold." "True," she replied evenly. "And if you've done your homework, you know I don't have the kind of contacts to pull off an operation like this without leaving a trail you can actually verify." Kincaid didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the folder, his jaw tightening. "I'm not the one you have to convince. My orders are to bring you in, process you, and let the courts handle the rest." "Off the record?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "If you've got enemies, they're powerful, and they want you out of the way fast." The door opened, cutting him off. A woman in a dark suit entered, her hair pulled into a severe bun. "Agent Kincaid, I'll take it from here," she said without looking at him. Kincaid gave Alana a brief nod and left. The woman sat across from her, setting down a thick legal brief. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Valerie Dwyer. You're facing multiple federal charges, Ms. Briggs. I'll be blunt, you're looking at life without parole, unless you cooperate. Alana's voice was calm. Cooperate how? Tell us who you've been working with. Give us names, routes, buyers. We know you're not the top of the chain. Alana's mouth curved into the faintest hint of a smile. You're asking me to give you names I don't have for crimes I didn't commit. That's going to be a problem. Dwyer's expression hardened. Then your problem just got bigger. You'll be transferred into federal custody tonight. Don't expect preferential treatment for your service record. The service record comment wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. By midnight, she was in a holding cell, the cinder block walls closing in as the hours ticked by. She kept replaying Holt's warning in her head, the way Kincaid's eyes betrayed uncertainty and the cold precision in Dwyer's voice. This wasn't just a case, it was a maneuver, the kind she'd seen in covert operations where the real objective was hidden beneath layers of misdirection. Somewhere out there, the people pulling the strings were already planning the next move. She didn't know yet that the next move would involve placing her somewhere they thought she couldn't survive. Not yet. Asterisk, it was nearly dawn when the cell door clanged open. The guard's voice was brisk, almost bored. Briggs, on your feet. Alana rose smoothly, muscles still tight from the cold metal bench. Two guards flanked her immediately, their hands resting near their sidearms, not because they feared she'd run, but because they knew she could. She was led through a series of locked gates and narrow corridors until they reached the loading bay. A dark gray prisoner transport bus idled there, its diesel engine rumbling in the pre-dawn air. The sky was still black, with only the faintest hint of purple on the horizon. Where am I going? She asked. Processing facility, one guard replied, eyes forward. It was the same vague answer she'd heard a dozen times during military. Transports meant to give nothing away. They shackled her wrists, waist, and ankles, the chains clinking with every step as she climbed onto the bus. Inside, rows of steel benches lined the walls. A handful of other inmates sat slouched in silence, orange jumpsuits glaring under the harsh fluorescent lights. Alana scanned them, automatically body language, eye contact, potential threats. Most avoided her gaze, but one man, heavy-set with a serpent tattoo curling up his neck, smirked when their eyes met. The bus pulled away, the city giving way to long stretches of empty highway. Time blurred. The air inside was heavy with the smell of sweat, diesel, and unwashed bodies. Through the tinted windows, she caught glimpses of signs. State Correctional Route 12. Federal Detention Corridor. Her instincts began to sharpen into unease. The direction didn't match the routes she knew for women's facilities in the area. She leaned slightly toward the nearest guard. This isn't the way to Carswell or Hazleton. The guard didn't look at her. Orders changed. That phrase, orders changed, was one she'd heard before. In the field, it meant improvisation. It meant danger. After another hour, the bus slowed, turning down a long fenced driveway. Floodlights illuminated high walls topped with razor wire. Guard towers stood at each corner, silhouettes of armed sentries visible against the pale morning sky. A massive steel sign came into view. United States Penitentiary, Blackthorn. Maximum security, male population only. The shackles around her ankles felt suddenly heavier. This wasn't a mistake. The bus hissed to a stop, and the inmates began to shuffle toward the exit. The air outside was cold and sharp, carrying the metallic tang of the high-security compound. A stocky intake officer waited at the gate, clipboard in hand. His eyes flipped to her restraints, then to the paperwork. Briggs, Alanum? Yes, she said flatly. Welcome to Blackthorn. He said it without irony, without hesitation, like she was just another name on his list. This is a men's prison, she stated. He smirked, tapping the clipboard. Paperwork says otherwise. Must be a clerical error. She knew better. Clerical errors didn't happen here, not with someone like her. This was placement with intent. Someone wanted her inside this place, among these men, where the odds of surviving a month, let alone a sentence, were microscopic. As she stepped through the gates, the sound of them locking behind her was louder than any battlefield gunfire she'd ever heard. This was no longer about clearing her name. It was about staying alive long enough to find out who had signed her death warrant. The air inside Blackthorn hit her like a wall, thick with the smell of bleach, sweat, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Alana kept her expression neutral, but every nerve in her body was awake. She had walked into ambush zones, enemy compounds, and insurgent hideouts before, but this place was different. Here, the threat didn't hide, it walked openly, stared directly into your eyes, and smiled while sharpening the knife. The intake process was deliberately dehumanizing. They took her from one station to another: fingerprints, photographs, medical check, and finally, the property counter. The guard behind the glass spoke without looking at her. "You'll get a temporary uniform. Permanent issue after classification." Her temporary uniform was just another orange jumpsuit, but stiffer, more worn, smelling faintly of industrial detergent and the last man who'd worn it. The guard pushed it through the slot with a pair of prison-issued sneakers, thin, sawless, no laces. They sent her to a small holding pen with chain-link walls while the rest of the intake group filed in. The men inside looked at her like they'd been given a gift. The serpent-tattooed man from the bus was there too, his smirk even wider now. "Looks like Christmas came early, boys," he drawled. A few chuckled. Alana sat in the far corner, back against the wall, knees drawn up loosely. She didn't respond. In Delta Force, silence wasn't weakness, it was bait. When the cell door finally opened, they marched the group down a long hallway. The noise of the prison hit her in wave shouts from unseen tiers, the clang of metal doors, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Blackthorn was alive, and its heartbeat was violence. Her assigned cell was on the 3rd tier of K-Block. The guard escorting her, a tall man with a buzz cut and a jaw like granite, unlocked the door and jerked his head toward the interior. "Welcome home, Briggs." Her cellmate was already there, a lean man in his 40s with ice blue eyes and tattoos running up both arms. He looked her over once, then returned to his push-ups without a word. Alana dropped her issued bedding. "On the top bunk. I take it you're not the chatty type." He grunted, still counting his reps. "You'll figure out how to survive here, or you won't." It was a warning, not advice. The rest of the day was orientation of the most brutal kind. In the yard, she kept her distance, mapping the landscape in her head. The north fence line was controlled by a group of white supremacists, identifiable by their matching tattoos and the way they clustered near the basketball court. The south end, near the weight racks, belonged to a loose coalition of Latino gangs. The central benches were neutral ground, but neutrality in Blackthorn was temporary, like dry land in a flood zone. Everywhere she walked, eyes followed, some curious, some calculating, some already hostile. During chow, she took a tray of unidentifiable stew and sat at the far end of a table, back to the wall. She'd barely taken a bite when a shadow fell across her. The serpent-tattooed man from intake leaned in, his breath smelling of cigarettes and cheap coffee. "You don't belong here," he said softly. "That's gonna make you a target, but maybe we can work something out." Alana's eyes flicked to his hands, then back to his face. "I've dealt with worse than you." He laughed, but it was an ugly sound. "Lady, you ain't even started dealing yet." She let him walk away. There was no advantage in making her first move in the open. The real fights were won in the shadows, and she intended to choose the battlefield herself. That night, lying on the thin mattress, she stared at the ceiling and reviewed everything she'd seen: the layout, the guards who paid attention, the Ones who didn't, the blind spots in the cameras. This place was a fortress, but like any fortress, it had cracks. She didn't just need to survive Blackthorn. She needed to figure out who had put her here, and why. And that meant she'd have to start playing the game. Before the game played her, the morning began with the blare of a siren and the thunder of boots in the tier. C-block stirred awake like a disturbed nest of hornets' voices rising, metal banging, curses echoing. Alana swung her legs off the bunk, already dressed in her jumpsuit. Her cellmate, the quiet man with the ice blue eyes, was lacing his sneakers with strips of torn fabric makeshift laces that had somehow slipped past inspection. She noted the detail and stored it away. In a place like this, every adaptation was a lesson in survival. "Breakfast," he said, almost as an afterthought, before stepping out when the door clanged open. In the chow hall, she chose her seat, with precision center of the room, near an exit, back to the wall. From there she could see everything: the guards' blind spots, the line of sight to the yard, the gang leaders in their unspoken territories. The serpent-tattooed man, whom she'd mentally labeled Serpent, was at his usual spot near the food line, laughing too loudly with his crew. He was already watching her, but today, she watched him back long enough for it to be noticed. In Delta Force, a prolonged gaze could be a challenge, an invitation, or a trap. Here, it was all three. Halfway through the meal, a commotion broke out near the serving station, 2 inmates shoving, voices rising. Guards moved in, their attention drawn to the noise. In that moment, Serpent's man, a wiry figure with a shaved head, slipped away from his group and started toward her table. He sat across from her without asking. "Serpent says you're interesting," he said. "I'm not," she replied, spearing a piece of grayish meat with her plastic fork. He smiled, but his eyes were flat. "He says you should come by the south wall after lunch. Talk business." "I don't do business." "You will," he said, standing and walking away as quietly as he'd arrived. Alana knew exactly what this was: an early attempt to rope her in, test her willingness to play their game. Declining would mark her as independent, dangerous in a place where alliances kept you breathing. Accepting could put her under their control. Neither option was acceptable. When yard time came, she made her choice. She didn't go to the south wall. Instead, she walked to the far north corner, near the weight racks where the Latino crews dominated the space. She asked for no favors, made no introductions, just started doing pull-ups on the cold steel bar. It was a calculated move, showing strength in a hostile zone without asking for protection. It told the watching eyes, because she knew they were watching, that she wasn't Serpent's property, and she wasn't intimidated by boundaries. When she dropped from the bar, she found herself facing a man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and the kind of posture that spoke of old authority. He looked her up and down, then simply nodded and walked away. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't safety. But it was acknowledgement, and in Blackthorn, that was currency. Later, back in the cell, her quiet cellmate finally spoke more than a sentence. "You just made an enemy," he said. "Probably more than one," she replied. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Good. That means you're not stupid enough to make friends too early." She lay back on the bunk, the faint hum of the prison settling around her. Enemies were inevitable. What mattered was choosing the right ones and making sure they feared you more than they hated you. The retaliation didn't come immediately. That was the first sign it was coming. Alana had dealt with operators who struck hard and fast, but she respected the ones who could wait. Serpent wasn't going to come at her with fists in the yard. That would draw too much heat from the guards. No, his move would be quieter, slower, designed to make her bleed without ever touching her. 2 days later, it started. Her breakfast tray was missing. She thought it was a mistake until lunch came and her name wasn't called. The guard at the serving line shrugged. "No tray for Briggs. Not my problem." she knew better than to complain. In here, a missing meal wasn't about food, it was about pressure. Hunger made people sloppy. Sloppy got you hurt. That night, her bedding was gone. Not stolen in the traditional sense. Taken and left somewhere just far enough that she'd have to step into another gang's claimed space to retrieve it. She didn't. She slept on the bare vinyl mat, hands folded across her chest, eyes half closed but never fully asleep. On the third day, she found her cell door unlocked during count, an unspoken invitation for trouble. She shut it herself and leaned against the wall, eyes on the hallway until the guard returned. Her cellmate finally broke the silence. "You're being tested," he said. "I noticed," she replied. "You got a hit back?" She shook her head. "Not yet. I want him to think I'm bending." It was a trick she'd used before. Give the enemy just enough to make them believe the pressure was working, then strike in a way they never saw coming. But timing was everything. Too soon, and it looked like desperation. Too late, and you risked becoming the prey they thought you were. The opening came during laundry detail. She was assigned with 6 other inmates, one of them Serpent's man with the shaved head. The job was tedious: sort, wash, dry, fold, but it offered something she hadn't had in days: movement, access, and cover. When the shaved head turned his back to load a dryer, she slipped a hand into the cart he'd been using. Inside, wrapped in a t-shirt, was a makeshift shiv, crude but deadly. She took it, swapped it for a bent plastic comb from her own pocket, and covered it again. Later that night, word would spread that Serpent's man had been caught with the weapon during a random shakedown. Alana didn't smile when she heard. In here, victories had to be invisible, but she knew Serpent would get the message. She could reach him, or his men, without ever laying a hand on them. From her bunk, she could hear the ripple effect. Whispers traveling faster than the guards could stop them. A few glances in her direction, some curious, some newly cautious. She lay back, letting the noise wash over her. This wasn't about winning yet. It was about shaping the battlefield. Asterisk. The air in C Block was wrong that morning. Alana had learned, long before Blackthorn, that danger had a smell not blood or gunpowder, but a mix of stillness and intent. The tier was quieter than usual. Conversations were hushed, eyes slid away from hers too quickly. Even the guards seemed to be moving differently, as if they sensed the charge in the air, but didn't know who would ground it. She didn't have to wait long to find out. Yard time came earlier than expected. An administrative shuffle no one explained. The gates opened, and the flood of inmates poured into the cracked concrete expanse under a cold winter sky. She walked as she always did, steady, neither hurried nor slow, taking up a spot near the pull-up bars at the north end. That's when she saw him. Serpent was leaning against the south wall, the tattoo on his neck coiled like it was alive. He wasn't alone. 4 men flanked him, each spaced just enough to move without tripping over each other. Their eyes tracked her as she worked the bar, chin rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Her cellmate's voice echoed in her head. "You gonna hit back?" She dropped to the ground and wiped her palms on her jumpsuit. The men started toward her, slow and deliberate. No shivs in sight, too risky in daylight, but their hands were loose, ready. The yard was too public for an outright murder, but not for a message. And she knew exactly what kind of message Serpent wanted to send. That no one defied him without paying in flesh. They boxed her in with casual precision, the kind that came from practice. The first blow came from the right, a hook aimed at her ribs. She stepped back just enough for it to graze her, catching the second man's arm before it could grab her neck. She didn't fight like an inmate. She fought like a soldier. A sharp twist sent the second man stumbling forward, colliding with the first. She pivoted, driving an elbow into the third man's sternum, feeling the air leave his lungs in a rush. The fourth lunged, but she sidestepped. letting his momentum carry him into the pull-up bar post. Shouts erupted from the sidelines, half encouragement, half alarm. Alana moved fast, but not too fast. The trick was to neutralize without drawing the kind of blood that would bring the CO swarming. A shove here, a trip there, a joint locked just long enough to send pain shooting up an arm. When the guards finally charged in, batons drawn, she was already stepping back, palms open, breathing steady. The four men were doubled over or sprawled on the concrete, groaning but alive. Serpent hadn't moved from the wall. Their eyes met across the yard. His smile was thin, dangerous, a promise. She'd humiliated his crew in public, and there was no way back from that. The war was no longer a shadow game. It had just gone loud. The aftermath of the fight rippled through Blackthorn like a shockwave. Within minutes, the prison erupted into chaos, alarms blaring, steel doors clanging shut, and the cold voice of the warden ordering a full lockdown. Inmates slammed against their cell doors, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Alana sat quietly on her bunk, muscles still humming from the confrontation. The echoes of Serpent's threats lingered in her mind, his thin smile hiding plans far worse than fists and bruises. The yard fight was only the beginning. As night fell, the lights suddenly flickered and died, plunging the tier into darkness. In the brief blackout, a shadow moved swiftly, an inmate disguised in a guard's jacket. The door to Ilana's cell creaked open. A weapon flashed in the faint glow, a crude shiv fashioned from a toothbrush. But Alana was faster. She twisted aside, grabbing the attacker's wrist and slamming him into the steel bars. The weapon clattered to the floor as guards flooded the corridor. From the shadows, Serpent's voice drifted, calm and cold. "We're just getting started, soldier." Alana's eyes hardened. She knew this was no ordinary fight. It was a battle for survival. The lockdown tightened around Blackthorn like a tightening noose, every corridor crawling with guards whose eyes darted like hawks searching for prey. Alana knew the stakes had escalated beyond verbal threats, and shoved Serpent wanted her broken, isolated, erased. Solitary confinement awaited anyone who crossed that invisible line. But waiting meant surrendering the initiative. And surrender wasn't an option. In the dead of night, when the prison's oppressive silence was broken only by distant echoes, Alana moved like a shadow. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. She slipped from her cell during the momentary shift change, the guards' backs turned, and the dim emergency lighting casting long, twisted shadows. Her target was Serpent, isolated for a late night headcount in the empty recreation yard. She found him leaning against a rusted fence, a smug grin betraying no fear. Without hesitation, Alana closed the distance, delivering a swift strike honed by years of Delta Force combat training, precise, controlled, and non-lethal. The blow caught him off guard, sending him sprawling to the ground with a grunt. As alarms began to wail in the distance, she stepped back into the darkness, eyes sharp, pulse steady. The message was clear. She was no victim. She was a force to be reckoned with, and the war inside Blackthorn had just turned deadly serious. The lockdown's heavy silence stretched over Blackthorn like a suffocating blanket, muting the usual cacophony of shouts, clanks, and footsteps that echoed through its endless concrete corridors. The air was thick with anticipation, a taut stillness, signaling that the war inside the prison was far from over, but had reached a precarious pause. Alana sat on her bunk, muscles aching and mind spinning, her breath steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She replayed the last few days, the fights, the silent threats, the dangerous dance with Serpent and his crew, and she understood something that had been true all along. Surviving Blackthorn wasn't just about brute strength or combat skills. It was about control of the narrative, the space, the alliances, and most importantly, control over one's own fear. Her cellmate, the quiet man with the ice blue eyes, remained mostly silent since the lockdown began, but tonight he spoke. "You changed the rules," he said quietly, eyes scanning the darkened cell block. "Serpent knows he can't just push you around anymore. But you made a lot of noise doing it. That makes you a target." Alana nodded slowly. She knew the gamble she had made. Sending that message, striking first, had earned her respect but also a dangerous spotlight. She was no longer the unknown woman wrongly sent to a men's prison. She was a force they couldn't ignore, and that painted a large target on her back. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every distant clang, every shuffled step, set her nerves on edge. Blackthorn was a place where silence could be as deadly as a knife. The fear wasn't just about physical harm. It was about the mental strain of knowing any moment could shatter the fragile balance. For Alana, the challenge was keeping her mind razor sharp, her emotions locked down, and her body ready for whatever came next. Days passed in this tense limbo. The lockdown lifted briefly, but the yard remained a dangerous place. Serpent and his allies maintained their cold stares, and whispers carried through the tears like poison. Yet, Alana found herself beginning to understand the unspoken rules of Blackthorn's brutal hierarchy. Alliances were currency. Fear was the common language. To survive, she needed to craft a network, a system of checks and balances that would protect her and provide leverage. But trust was a rare commodity here, and every ally was a potential threat. She started small. In the mess hall, she exchanged curt nods with a few inmates who seemed neutral, their eyes cautious but not hostile. In the rec yard, she worked silently beside others during exercise, careful not to engage in conversations that could be twisted against her. Behind the scenes, she observed patterns, the shifts of guards who were more lenient, the gangs that controlled certain territories, and the prison officials whose decisions could tip the scales of power. Every detail was a piece of a puzzle she was determined to solve. One afternoon, a new player entered the game. A tall, wiry man with a jagged scar running from temple to jawline was transferred to key block. His arrival was met with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The guards called him Mace, and his reputation preceded him, known for being ruthless but strategic, someone who could bend the chaos of Blackthorn to his will. Alana watched closely as Mace navigated the tense social landscape, noting his measured words and calculating eyes. He didn't approach her directly, but their glances met enough times to plant a seed of potential alliance. Meanwhile, Alana's own skills became her greatest asset. She used her knowledge of tactics and human behavior to stay one step ahead. When an outbreak of violence flared between rival gangs, she kept her distance but memorized the patterns, where fights erupted, who led them, and which guards responded slowly. She used this information discreetly, passing tips to guards who seemed less corrupt, gaining small favors in return. It was a dangerous game, but she had learned to balance risk with reward. Her training as a Delta Force commander was more than just physical prowess. It was mental resilience, strategic thinking, and patience. These qualities allowed her to weather the storm. Nights were the hardest, the cell block plunging into darkness except for the faint glow of emergency lights. She lay awake, imagining scenarios, planning moves, and building contingencies. The prison wasn't just a cage. It was a battlefield of minds, and she refused to lose Dot as the weeks passed. Alana's presence shifted from a dangerous unknown to a respected figure in Blackthorn's complicated social order. The initial hostility gave way to wary acceptance, though the threat from Serpent and his faction never fully dissipated. The balance was fragile, maintained by constant vigilance and calculated decisions. One evening, a guard slipped a folded note under her cell door, a rare communication in a place where messages were often intercepted or twisted. The note was simple but powerful. Meet at the library after lights out. Alone, Alana's pulse quickened. The library was a neutral zone, a rare refuge where knowledge was power and violence was discouraged. at least in theory. She knew meeting unknown parties in Blackthorn was risky, but the note hinted at an opportunity. It could be a trap, but it could also be a chance to gain crucial allies or information. That night, after the final head count and the dimming of lights, Alana moved quietly through the labyrinth of corridors, her footsteps muted by years of training and survival instincts. The prison was a shadowy maze, every corner holding potential danger, but also possibility. Inside the library, she found Mace waiting, his eyes sharp and unreadable. He nodded once, acknowledging her presence without warmth or threat. "You've been making waves," he said quietly. "That kind of attention comes with a price, but it also means you're someone worth talking to." Their conversation was cautious, a dance of words and intentions. Mace offered an alliance, temporary, fragile, but real. Together, they could challenge Serpent's hold and navigate the deadly politics of Blackthorn more effectively. Alana weighed the risks but recognized that solitude was no longer an option. Night stretched on with plans and promises made in whispers. When she finally returned to her cell, Alana felt a shift inside, a spark of hope amid the darkness. The battle for survival in Blackthorn was far from over, but for the first time, she sensed that the tide might be turning. The uneasy alliance with Mace marked a turning point for Alana. Until now, she had relied mostly on her own instincts, training, and silent observation to survive the brutal undercurrents of Blackthorn. But Mace brought something different: experience. In the prison's complex political game, knowledge of shifting loyalties, and crucially, muscle and influence that could tip the balance. Their partnership was tentative, built on mutual benefit rather than trust. Alana understood the stakes. In a place like Blackthorn, alliances were fragile and betrayal was never far behind. Yet, she had learned the hard way that isolation was the quickest path to ruin. Together, they began to map the power dynamics with new precision. Mace shared information about the factions, the white supremacists who controlled the North Yard, the Latino gangs anchoring the South, and smaller groups jockeying for position in the gray zones in between. He knew which guards could be persuaded, which would turn a blind eye, and which were ruthless enough to exploit the chaos for their own gain. Alana listened carefully, weighing every word. With her military background, she thought in terms of strategy and tactics, how to control space, manage risks, and anticipate enemy moves. Mace offered the street-level insights she lacked: the unwritten rules and delicate balances of power inside these walls. The days that followed were a dance of subtle maneuvers. Alana maintained her distance from Serpent's faction, but she also avoided outright confrontation. Instead, she strengthened her position quietly, winning small concessions, building networks of influence that didn't rely on brute force. One afternoon, a commotion erupted near the North Yard's basketball court territory, firmly claimed by the white supremacist group. Alana was nearby when a young inmate was shoved roughly to the ground by a burly man sporting matching tattoos. The crowd's murmur shifted instantly, tension crackling like electricity in the air. Without hesitation, Alana stepped forward, placing herself between the aggressor and the fallen inmate. Her voice was calm but firm. "Enough." The man sneered, eyes narrowing. "This doesn't concern you, Briggs. It does when you're starting fights that can get people killed." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the man spat on the ground and stepped back, grudgingly accepting her intervention. A few others nodded in silent approval. It was a small victory, one that sent a clear message. Alana was no pushover. Mace observed from the sidelines, nodding once with approval. "You're learning the rules fast." But survival in Blackthorn wasn't just about showing strength. It was about patience, endurance, and making the right choices when the stakes were highest. Alana knew this all too well. One evening, a letter arrived from an outside source, a rarity in a place designed to isolate and erase identity. The note was brief and cryptic: "Trust no one." The real enemy is closer than you think. The message unsettled her. Who had sent it? Was it a warning or a trap? Was the threat inside the prison walls or lurking somewhere she hadn't yet looked? Her instincts sharpened. She reviewed everyone around her, the allies, the enemies, even the guards. Blackthorn was a pressure cooker of secrets, deception, and shifting loyalties. In that maze, the greatest danger was often the unseen hand. Meanwhile, Alana continued to train, honing her physical and mental edge. She knew her body was her first line of defense, but her mind was the real weapon. Every conversation, every gesture, every glance was data to be analyzed and stored. The months passed. With slow but steady progress, the guards grew to recognize her as a prisoner who commanded respect without demanding it. Other inmates approached cautiously, some with offers of cooperation, others with veiled threats. Through it all, Alana never lost sight of her core mission: to uncover who had orchestrated her wrongful transfer to Blackthorn and why. The answers were buried somewhere in the tangled web of prison politics and shadowy external forces. One afternoon, Mace brought her news something that shifted the entire game. A corrupt official, known to have influence over prisoner assignments, was rumored to be under investigation. If the rumor was true, it could mean the key to Alana's predicament was closer than she'd thought. The revelation sparked a surge of determination. Alana began to reach out more actively, connecting with inmates who had ties to the outside world or information networks. She carefully tested loyalties, aware that one wrong move could destroy her fragile web. Her growing network uncovered pieces of a dark puzzle: forged documents, bribed officials, and a conspiracy that went far beyond Blackthorn's walls. The plan to place her in a men's prison was no accident. It was a calculated move designed to silence her, to bury her beneath threats she couldn't fight. Armed with this knowledge, Alana began preparing for the next phase, one where she would not only survive but strike back. The war inside Blackthorn was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. She steeled herself for what lay ahead. The battles were far from over, but she had found something stronger than fear: purpose. The growing network of alliances within Blackthorn gave Alana a rare glimpse of hope amid the harsh realities of prison life. Yet, even as she built connections, she remained vigilant. Trust was a precious and dangerous commodity. Here, one misstep could unravel everything. The prison's labyrinthine social order was a battlefield where deception lurked behind every smile, and survival depended on reading between the lines. Mace became an invaluable ally, guiding her through the delicate balance of power. He introduced her quietly to a few inmates who held sway in their respective factions, men and women who were influential not through violence, but through respect and control of critical resources. These connections allowed Alana to gather intelligence she could never have accessed alone. One of these was a woman named Tessa, a mid-30s Latina with piercing eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness tempered by fairness. Tessa controlled the distribution of commissary items on the south side and was respected enough to keep her territory relatively calm. Their initial meeting was cautious, but Alana's straightforwardness and calm confidence earned Tessa's grudging trust. Information is power, Tessa told her during their first conversation, and in here, power keeps you alive. Alana nodded. I'm looking for the truth behind why I'm here. Who put me in Blackthorn and how to get out? Tessa studied her, then gave a slow nod. That's a dangerous path, but you've got guts. Maybe you're the kind of trouble this place needs. Together, they began piecing together fragments of the conspiracy surrounding Alana's wrongful incarceration. Tessa's network had ears in the guards' quarters and the warden's office, and she shared whispers about a crook official, funneling prisoners for personal gain, names and dates that fit the puzzle Alana had been assembling. Meanwhile, Serpent's faction was no longer the unchallenged power it once was. Alana's defiance and alliances had eroded their influence, sowing distrust among their ranks. Serpent himself was forced to retreat into the shadows, plotting His next move, wary now of provoking a prisoner who had shown herself capable of extraordinary resistance. Alana's cellmate remained a quiet but steady presence, a reminder of the human faces caught in the prison's unforgiving machine. Occasionally, they exchanged brief words, warnings, encouragements, strategic observations. The solidarity in their silence was a lifeline. One night, a surge of tension hit the block as a fight broke out near the recreational yard, an explosion of violence that reminded everyone how quickly peace could shatter. Alana stayed apart, focusing on the bigger picture. She knew that battles like this were distractions, tools used by those who wanted to keep inmates divided and powerless. Her mind was set on something greater, exposing the corruption that had trapped her here, and finding a way back to freedom. Her chance came unexpectedly. During a rare supervised meeting in the prison library, a lawyer arrived to meet with an inmate from a neighboring block. Alana observed closely, noting the guarded expressions and whispered exchanges. After the lawyer left, Alana managed to catch a brief moment with a prison Ada woman who appeared sympathetic, discreet in her demeanor. Through careful, coded conversation, Alana hinted at her situation, testing if the aide might be a conduit to the outside world. The aide hesitated, but finally slipped a small note into Alana's hand. "Help is coming. Stay strong." The words ignited a flicker of hope. Despite the cold walls and harsh days, there were people outside who had not forgotten her, who were fighting for her. Buoyed by this, Alana doubled down on her preparations. She refined her plans with Mace and Tessa, coordinating subtle moves to protect themselves and gather more evidence. Every whisper, every scrap of information was a weapon, yet Blackthorn remained a volatile place. One misstep could mean brutal retaliation, solitary confinement, or worse. Alana balanced on a razor's edge, every day a test of endurance and will. Through it all, she kept the memory of her past alive, not just as a former Delta Force commander, but as a woman determined to reclaim her life and dignity. The prison walls might be thick and cold, but her resolve was steel. As weeks turned into months, a fragile order settled. Alana's presence was no longer a secret or a threat, but a fact acknowledged by guards and inmates alike. The war for control hadn't ended, but she had carved out a place where she could breathe and plan her next move. In the quiet moments before lights out, she allowed herself a brief thought of freedom, not as a distant dream, but a goal within reach. The days grew shorter, the chill of early winter settling into Blackthorn's cold concrete bones. Inside the walls, however, the tension never eased. Alana moved carefully through the tiers, her steps measured and deliberate, each action a calculated piece of a larger strategy. The alliances she had forged were fragile but essential threads in a web she was weaving to trap the truth and claw her way out. Mace remained a shadowed figure at her side, his presence a steadying force amid the chaos. They shared few words, but each glance exchanged spoke volumes of mutual respect and the unspoken understanding that survival required both strength and subtlety. Together, they navigated the shifting currents of power, each day drawing closer to the moment when they would make their stand. One afternoon, Alana received word through her network that a meeting was scheduled between some of the prison's influential inmates and a high-ranking official from the Department of Corrections. Such meetings were rare and often shrouded in secrecy, but the whispers spoke of potential changes restructuring that could affect inmate assignments and even the warden's position. Alana sensed an opportunity. If she could infiltrate this gathering, or at least uncover what was being planned, it might provide the leverage she needed to expose the conspiracy that had brought her here. But gaining access required more than courage. It demanded careful planning and trust in those who might not have her best interests at heart. She approached Tessa with the idea, knowing the Latina's influence in commissary distribution and her connections to various factions made her an invaluable ally. Tessa considered the proposal, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "This isn't just about power," Tessa said slowly. "It's about survival. And playing in the big leagues means risking everything." Alana met her gaze steadily. "I'm ready for that risk." Together, they devised a plan. Tessa would use her network to create a distraction during the meeting, drawing guards and rival inmates away from the main gathering. Meanwhile, Alana, with Mace's help, would slip into the meeting area disguised as part of the cleaning crew, a role that granted access but often went overlooked. The night of the meeting arrived with an oppressive silence. The prison was eerily still as Alana prepared, donning a janitor's uniform and carrying a mop bucket. Every step echoed in the narrow corridors as she made her way to the conference room, a sterile, windowless chamber where whispers of power were exchanged. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Prison officials and influential inmates sat around a long table, their faces shadowed by harsh overhead lights. Alana's heart pounded, but her demeanor remained calm, her eyes scanning for any hint of the truth she sought. She overheard fragments of conversation, mentions of forged documents, prisoner transfers, and hush payments. Names that matched those from the notes and whispers she'd gathered over months. The web was unraveling. Suddenly, a guard entered, announcing the arrival of an unexpected visitor, a lawyer with a reputation for investigating prison corruption. The room shifted, unease rippling through the group. Alana's mind raced. This was the moment. The cracks were showing. As the meeting progressed, Tessa's distraction unfolded perfectly. Loud shouts erupted in the adjacent wing, drawing guards away and thinning the security around the conference room. Seizing the chance, Alana slipped closer, her phone smuggled inside a hidden pocket, ready to capture evidence. But then, footsteps sounded behind her. A hand gripped her shoulder, strong and unyielding. "Going somewhere, Briggs?" Serpent's voice hissed in her ear. Her blood ran cold. Despite the months of conflict and shifting power, he had managed to find her in this moment of vulnerability. She twisted sharply, breaking free and facing him with steady eyes, not without the truth. A tense standoff ensued, the corridor heavy with silent threats. Before Serpent could strike, Mace appeared, stepping between them with a glare that promised consequences. The confrontation was brief but brutal, a reminder that in Blackthorn, every move was contested. Alana seized the moment to slip away, heart pounding as she returned to the meeting room. Her phone captured key conversations, proof of the conspiracy that had ensnared her. As the meeting concluded, Alana's allies moved quickly, securing the evidence and preparing to send it beyond the prison walls. Back in her cell, the weight of what she'd done settled over her. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but for the first time in months, Alana felt a surge of hope. She was no longer a prisoner lost in a broken system. She was a woman fighting for justice and ready to reclaim her life. The next few days in Blackthorn passed with a taut, dangerous stillness. Alana kept her head down, outwardly calm, but every sense was on high alert. The evidence she'd gathered during the meeting, a handful of audio recordings, several grainy but damning photos, and a list of names, was now in the possession of Tessa's outside contact. Theoretically, it was beyond the reach of the corrupt officials, but in a place like Blackthorn, nothing was certain until it hit the light of day. Tessa kept her posted with short-coded messages slipped into commissary packets. "Safe so far, contact confirmed, be ready." Each one tightened the coil of anticipation in Alana's chest. Mace, however, was less optimistic. "The walls talk, Briggs. If we know this much, someone on the other side knows too. They'll come for you before this gets out. I'm counting on it," Alana replied quietly, her eyes narrowing. "The more desperate they are, the more mistakes they'll make." That night, her prediction proved correct. 2 guards she didn't recognize appeared at her cell door during evening lockup, their faces impassive but their eyes cold. "Warden wants to see you," one said. It wasn't phrased as a request. Alana rose slowly, her movements deliberate. "Lead the way." They walked her down a dim, narrow hallway that bypassed the usual administrative route, taking her deeper into a section of the prison rarely used for official business. The scent of bleach was heavy in the air, masking something less pleasant. The room they brought her to was small, bare, and windowless, lit only by a single buzzing fluorescent strip. A metal chair waited in the center, its legs bolted to the floor. The warden was already there, a tall, spare man with a hawk-like nose, and the cultivated stillness of someone used to holding power over others. "Briggs," he began, his tone flat. "You've been busy." Alana said nothing, meeting his gaze without flinching. He circled her like a predator, speaking in low, measured tones. "You've been stirring up trouble, making friends you shouldn't. And now there's talk of evidence, false allegations, dangerous rumors." "Truth isn't a rumor," Alana replied evenly. The warden's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can play hero in here? This is my world, Briggs. You breathe because I allow it." Her jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "You'll lose this world soon enough. People on the outside know what's happening here. You can't stop it." The warden's smile vanished. His next words were a quiet threat. "We can make you disappear before they even get a chance to try." Before he could say more, a sharp knock sounded on the door. One of the guards stepped in, muttering something urgently in the warden's ear. The warden's expression flickered anger, then calculation. Without another word to her, he gestured. To the guards, "Take her back." As they led her away, Alana's mind raced. Something had rattled him. Whatever it was, it meant her allies outside were moving faster than he'd anticipated. Back in her cell, she found a folded scrap of paper tucked beneath her blanket. It was from Tessa, message delivered. Outside eyes watching. Hold steady, that night, she barely slept. In the darkness, the hum of the prison seemed louder, every distant footstep magnified. She knew the warden's threat was real, but so was the momentum building beyond these walls. 2 days later, the first signs of change appeared. Guards began moving with a different kind of tension, their conversations clipped in private. Rumors spread that state investigators were on site, reviewing records and interviewing select inmates. Then, just after midday count, Alana was summoned again, this time by a guard she knew, one who had occasionally turned a blind eye when she moved between factions. "Pack your things, Briggs," he said quietly. "You're being transferred." Her pulse quickened. Transfers could mean anything: protective custody, solitary, or worse. But the guard's eyes held something she hadn't seen in months, the faintest glimmer of encouragement. "Where to?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not my place to say. But it's not bad news." The transfer process was brisk and efficient. She was escorted to a secure van, her wrists cuffed but her mind sharp and alert. Through the tinted windows, she caught glimpses of the outside world, the pale winter sky, the bare trees lining the perimeter road, the faint, bittersweet smell of freedom. They drove for over an hour before the van pulled into a different facility, one far smaller and cleaner than Blackthorn. As she was led inside, a man in a plain suit stepped forward, introducing himself as an investigator with the State Attorney General's office. "We've been looking into your case, Ms. Briggs," he said, his voice professional but not unkind. "We have reason to believe you were wrongfully convicted and that there has been significant misconduct within Blackthorn. We'll be asking for your full cooperation." Alana exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of months of tension begin to shift. "You'll get it," she said. "But you should know this goes deeper than just my case." "We know," the investigator replied. "And that's exactly why you're here." For the first time since being thrown into Blackthorn's concrete jaws, Alana felt the cage around her start to loosen. She wasn't free yet, but she was finally in a place where freedom was more than a fantasy. She straightened, meeting the investigator's gaze with the same steel she'd carried into battle years before. Then let's finish this. The new facility was a strange mix of relief and unease. It lacked the oppressive darkness of blackthorn, no constant smell of mildew, no endless screaming from unseen corners, but it was still a cage. The walls were cleaner, the staff more professional, and the air somehow lighter, yet Alana could feel the weight of every locked door she passed. She knew better than to confuse less cruel with safe. Her first 2 days were spent in observation. A counselor came by to assess her adjustment, asking questions with polite detachment, as if her months in Blackthorn were just another entry on a clipboard. Alana gave only enough answers to avoid suspicion. She'd learned long ago that too much honesty, even with people claiming to help, was a gamble she didn't need to take. The real breakthrough came on the 3rd morning when the state investigator returned. His name was David Kane, mid-40s, with an unshakable calm that told her he'd been in messy situations before. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 other members of his team accompanied him, each carrying sealed evidence boxes. Miss Briggs, Kane began, "What we're about to show you stays between us for now." These boxes contain documentation from Blackthorn's internal records, including restricted logs and camera footage the warden tried to have destroyed. Our forensic team recovered most of it from backup drives. He placed a stack of photographs on the table. Alana's stomach tightened. She recognized the faces instantly: guards, inmates, and 2 civilians she'd seen visiting the warden's office, all caught in moments they probably thought were private. Some showed cash-changing hands. Others displayed injuries on prisoners who'd later disappeared. Alana tapped one photo with her finger. "That's Price, guard on Cub Block. He was running contraband with Sykes." Kane nodded. "Exactly. And with your testimony, plus corroboration from other witnesses, we can push this into criminal charges against multiple parties." Alana leaned back, letting the information settle. "So what's the catch? You don't pull this kind of heat without someone trying to burn you for it." Kane gave a thin smile. "The catch is that you're still legally an inmate. Any moves we make have to be airtight, or the defense will argue you're an unreliable witness with an agenda." She almost laughed. "An agenda? Sure. My agenda is not spending the rest of my life in a cage for something I didn't do." One of the other investigators, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice like sandpaper, leaned forward. "Then help us make that happen. We'll arrange a series of formal depositions under protective status. You'll detail everything, every conversation, every exchange you witnessed. We cross-reference that with what we've recovered, and we get the truth on record." It wasn't the kind of mission she'd trained for in Delta Force, but the structure felt familiar. Gather intel, confirm it, strike with precision. And just like in the field, hesitation could kill the operation. Over the next week, Alana was escorted daily to a secure interview room where she laid out the Blackthorn network in detail. She described the bribes disguised as maintenance orders, the inmate fights staged to distract from smuggling runs, the intimidation of prisoners who refused to cooperate. She named names without flinching. In between sessions, Kane's team updated her on their progress. They'd contacted Tessa and Mace discreetly, extracting their statements while keeping them out of immediate danger. The outside contact who'd smuggled her original evidence had also agreed to testify. Slowly, the threads she'd pulled inside Blackthorn were weaving into a rope strong enough to drag the whole corrupt structure into the open. But Kane warned her not to mistake momentum for victory. "They'll push back harder now," he said one evening, his tone low. "Word is already getting out to the wrong people. We've intercepted communications suggesting they want to discredit you before this goes public." Alana's brow furrowed. "How?" "Digging into your past," Kane replied. "Looking for anything they can twist your military service, the circumstances of your arrest, even personal relationships." She snorted. "Let them dig. I've got nothing to hide. And if they try to smear my service record, They're going to find out exactly how many people can vouch for me. Still, the warning lodged in her mind. She'd seen reputations destroyed by half-truths before, and she knew a smear campaign could work faster than the truth if it hit the media first. The first real sign of retaliation came 2 days later. A news article appeared online, citing unnamed sources who claimed Alana had been involved in illegal arms trading overseas. The allegations were laughable to anyone who actually knew her record, but the comment section was already full of venom. Strangers deciding she was guilty based on a headline. Kane's team moved quickly, issuing formal statements and preparing counter-evidence. It's a distraction, Kane told her. They want you rattled, don't let them get in your head. She didn't. Instead, she doubled down on the work, providing clearer timelines, cross-referencing dates with shipment records, even recalling small details about guard schedules that Kane's team could verify against electronic logs. Each new piece made their case stronger and harder to dismiss. By the end of her second week in the new facility, Kane's demeanor had shifted. There was less caution in his voice, more quiet confidence. "We're almost there, Ms. Briggs," he told her. "The Attorney General's office is preparing to file charges. Once that happens, we'll move to have your conviction vacated." Alana felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in months. Hope. Not just for herself, but for Tessa, for Mace, for every inmate still trapped under the warden's thumb. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she let herself imagine walking out of a prison, not in cuffs, but as a free woman. The thought was dangerous. It made the walls feel closer when she opened her eyes, but it was also fuel. She'd made it this far. She could finish the fight. The morning began with the sound of footsteps echoing too close to her door. Alana sat up instantly, every instinct sharpening. In the new facility, movement at this hour was rare unless something was wrong. The door slid open to reveal Officer Ramirez, one of the only guards she trusted even slightly. "You've got a visit," he said, his voice lower than usual. "But it's not Kane or his people." That set alarms ringing in her mind. "Who is it?" Ramirez hesitated. "Lawyers, private. They say they're here on behalf of an interested third party." Alana didn't like the phrasing. Still, refusing to meet them would only hand her enemies another weapon. They'd claim she was uncooperative. She nodded, and Ramirez escorted her down the corridor to the visitation room. 2 men in tailored suits were waiting. Their smiles were too polished, their posture too relaxed for this to be a casual meeting. The taller one introduced himself as Mr. Blake, the other as Mr. Harris. "We represent parties who have a vested interest in avoiding unnecessary disruption," Blake began smoothly. "You've been making statements that, if pursued, could lead to very public, very messy outcomes. We believe this is not in your best interest." Alana sat back, crossing her arms. "You mean it's not in your client's best interest?" Harris leaned forward, his voice dropping. "We're prepared to offer you a substantial settlement. You'd be transferred out of state, new identity, clean record. In exchange, you withdraw your cooperation with the investigation." Alana almost laughed at the audacity. "You think I'd take hush money after what I've seen? After what they did to people inside Blackthorn?" Blake's smile tightened. "Think carefully. The alternative is unpleasant. Old charges resurfacing. Friends of yours being re-examined by law enforcement. Sometimes the clean way out is the smart way out." For a moment, the room felt colder. Alana had dealt with threats before: cartel enforcers, warlords, insurgents. But hearing these men speak so casually about destroying lives triggered a deep, familiar anger. She leaned forward until her eyes locked on Blake's. "You don't scare me. You tell whoever sent you that they should have picked someone who didn't survive Delta Force missions in war zones. Now get out before I stop being polite." The meeting ended abruptly. Ramirez escorted her back without a word, but the tension in his jaw told her he'd overheard enough to understand the gravity of the situation. Later that afternoon, Kane appeared, visibly agitated. "We just got word you were visited." "Why? Didn't they clear it with us?" "They didn't need to," Alana replied. "And they tried to buy me off." Kane's eyes darkened. "We'll log the contact and add it to the case file. This actually helps us. It shows desperation." Still, Alana knew it also meant her enemies were shifting tactics. They'd tried smearing her in the press, and now they'd moved to direct intimidation. The next step would likely be something more dangerous. She was right. 2 nights later, during lights out, a faint scraping sound woke her. She stayed perfectly still, breathing slow and shallow, listening. The sound grew closer, someone working at her cell door. When the latch clicked softly, she moved in one smooth motion. She rolled out of bed, low to the ground. The door swung open, revealing a shadowy figure stepping inside. Alana struck first, driving her shoulder into the intruder's midsection and sending him staggering back into the hallway. The man's hand clutched something metallic, too short for a knife, but still a weapon. Before he could recover, 2 guards came running, shouting commands. The intruder bolted, vanishing into the darkness beyond the corner. 1 guard gave chase. The other stayed to secure Alana's door. By morning, word had spread. Kane arrived, his expression grim. "They're escalating. We'll be filing for immediate protective custody. You won't be in general population again until this is over." Protective custody meant isolation, which Alana hated, but she understood the necessity. It also meant fewer opportunities for her enemies to stage another accident. From her secure unit, she continued working with Kane's team via secure video calls. Each session was more focused now, zeroing in on the individuals most critical to the case. Meanwhile, the Attorney General's office moved forward with indictments. When the charges were announced publicly, the reaction was explosive. News networks ran headlines for days. "Corruption scandal rocks state prison system." And the list of defendants included the Blackthorn warden, multiple guards, and even 2 state contractors. The photographs Kane had shown her were now plastered across the evening news. Inside the facility, the atmosphere shifted. Staff treated her with a mix of wariness and respect, and some inmates began passing quiet messages of support through the few channels available. She even received a letter from Mace, written in his usual blunt style. "You're shaking the walls, Briggs. Don't stop now." But Alana knew the fight wasn't over. The indictments were only the first step. The trials ahead would be long and ugly, and every day until then, she would remain a target. One evening, as she sat on her bunk staring at the ceiling, she thought about the choice she'd made when those lawyers offered her a way out. She could have taken it, disappeared, started over somewhere far away. But that would have meant leaving Blackthorn's victims in the dark, their stories buried under threats and payoffs. That wasn't who she was. It had never been who she was. Kane's voice echoed in her mind from one of their first conversations. "With your testimony, we can end this." She intended to see that promise through, no matter how dangerous the road ahead became. The courthouse in downtown Raleigh was a fortress of glass and stone, flanked by media vans and camera crews that had been camped outside for days. Alana sat in the back of the transport van, wrists shackled, heart steady despite the circus waiting. Beyond the tinted windows, she had faced warlords with militias at their backs and stared down enemy fire in the desert heat. This was a different battlefield, but no less dangerous. Here, the weapons were words, perception, and the slow grind of the judicial machine. Kane sat beside her, his suit crisp, expression unreadable. "You'll be under oath the entire time," he reminded her, though they both knew she didn't need the prompt. "They'll try to rattle you, get you to contradict yourself, drag in your military past to twist it against you. Don't let them control the pace." "I won't," she said simply. Inside, the trial was already in motion. The warden, 3 senior guards, and 2 state contractors sat clustered with their attorneys at the defense table. All wore tailored suits instead of prison garb. But Alana saw the same arrogance she'd come to recognize in men who believed the system would always protect them. When the judge called her name, the room fell to a hush. Cameras clicked as she walked to the witness stand, every step deliberate. After she was sworn in, Kane began the direct examination. "Ms. Briggs, could you state your name and background for the record?" "Alana Patrice Briggs, former commander, United States Army Delta Force, served in classified operations from 2007 to 2016. Kane guided her carefully at first, how she had been wrongly sentenced, how she arrived at Blackthorn, and the immediate atmosphere of intimidation she encountered. As she spoke, she kept her eyes on him or the jury, never the defense. She described the yard fights, the deliberate overcrowding, the way guards allowed certain inmates to act as enforcers. Then she spoke of the night she saw a contractor delivering unmarked packages directly into the warden's office. Kane displayed the photograph she had taken grainy, but damning, and the courtroom murmured. The defense objected often. But the judge, perhaps aware of the high-profile nature of the case, allowed much of her testimony to stand. When Kane was done, the defense attorney for the warden rose, adjusting his silk tie with a smirk. "Ms. Briggs, you've described yourself as a highly trained combat operative. Isn't it fair to say you're also highly trained in deception?" "I'm trained to survive," she replied evenly. "There's a difference." He circled her, like a predator testing for weakness. "You claim to have seen illegal activity, but isn't it possible you misunderstood what you were seeing? After all, you were in prison for a violent offense at the time, an offense that speaks to your capacity for aggression." "I was wrongly convicted," she said, holding his gaze. "And I know the difference between a supply delivery and contraband being handed off under the cover of night." He pushed harder, suggesting her military record made her prone to paranoia, that her time in solitary had warped her perception. Alana let him talk, answering only with precise, fact-based responses. She could see his frustration growing when his barbs failed to provoke an emotional outburst. Finally, he tried the last weapon in his arsenal, implying her testimony was motivated by revenge rather than justice. "That's where you're wrong," she said, leaning forward slightly. "If it were about revenge, I would have handled it inside. This is about stopping men who use the system to destroy lives for profit. And I'll stand by that under any cross-examination you want to throw at me." The jury's attention sharpened. Kane's lips tightened in the barest hint of approval. After hours on the stand, she was escorted back to a secure waiting area. Her body ached from the tension, but she knew she'd held the line. Through the soundproof glass, she could hear the muffled rumble of reporters outside. That evening, the trial coverage dominated the news. Pundits dissected every sentence she had spoken, while protesters outside the courthouse held signs reading "Justice for Blackthorn Victims" and "End Prison. Corruption Now." Inside her cell that night, Alana allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought of the people who hadn't lived to tell their stories, the inmate beaten to death in the showers, the ones left untreated in medical until it was too late, the quiet, forgotten names buried in DOC files. She thought of Mace still, inside, and wondered if the walls of Blackthorn felt any lighter now that the truth was in daylight. The next morning, Kane visited before the session began. "You hit them harder than they expected. We've got 2 minor defendants talking plea deals already. They're scared." "Good," Alana said. "They should be." He studied her for a long moment. "You know, Briggs, after this, you could have a future in something other than running from the past. Federal witness protection isn't the only option. The Bureau's already been whispering about consult work training, security analysis." She smirked faintly. "One fight at a time, Kane." When she returned to court, the defense shifted strategy, focusing on technicalities and procedural errors. But the momentum had already swung. Each witness after her reinforced her testimony, painting a picture of systemic abuse that even the Most skilled defense couldn't fully erase Dot by the end of the week. The prosecution rested its case. Alana knew the verdict was still uncertain. Juries could be unpredictable, but she also knew the truth was out. And once the truth was out, it was harder to bury. That night, she lay in her bunk with a quiet sense of finality settling in her chest. The war wasn't over, but she'd made it to the battlefield's other side. For a woman who had walked into Blackthorn as just another number, that was a victory in itself. The final day of the trial dawned cold and gray, the sky hanging low over Raleigh like a lid. Alana arrived in the courthouse under heavy escort, the sound of protesters chanting faint through the thick stone walls. Inside, the jury had been deliberating for nearly 24 hours. She sat at the prosecution table beside Kane, hands folded loosely, body language calm despite the storm brewing in her mind. Every instinct from her years in Delta Force told her this was the waiting before an assault, the quiet moment where anything could happen. When the bailiff's voice broke the silence, "All rise," the tension in the courtroom surged. Jury filed in, each face carefully blank. Alana searched them for clues and found only the disciplined neutrality of people carrying a heavy decision. The judge addressed the foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The paper was passed to the clerk, then to the judge, who read it before handing it back. On the charge of conspiracy to traffic contraband into a state correctional facility. Guilty on the charge of aggravated assault under color of authority. Guilty on the charge of second-degree murder in the death of inmate James Torres. Guilty. Each word landed like a clean strike in a fight, controlled, precise, but devastating. A murmur swept the gallery, reporters' pens scratching furiously. Alana kept her expression neutral, though she felt the knot in her chest begin to ease. When the verdicts were read for the remaining defendants, 2 guards and a contractor, similar words followed, all guilty. All facing decades. The warden's face stayed stone-like, but his jaw worked tight. He didn't look at her. That was fine. She'd spent enough of her life looking at men like him. Kane leaned slightly toward her. "This is as clean as we could have hoped for." She gave the barest nod. She wasn't in the mood for celebration. Yet Delta training had taught her to wait until you were fully clear of the field before you dropped your guard. Outside, the media swarm was ravenous. Kane shielded her as they exited, but microphones still thrust toward her, voices calling her name. "Miss Briggs, do you feel vindicated? Will you push for reform in the prison system? What happens to you now?" She didn't answer. Not here. The courthouse steps weren't a battlefield she intended to fight on. Back in the secure van, the quiet was almost oppressive. Kane finally broke it. "You've got options now. Witness protection if you want to disappear. Consulting offers if you want to stay in the fight. Hell, even book deals and speaking circuits are coming your way." She looked out the window at the city rolling past. "I didn't do this for headlines, Kane. I did it so people still stuck in that place might have a shot at making it out alive. Whatever comes next, it has to matter." When they reached the holding facility, Alana found her cell already cleared of most of her things. The staff knew she wouldn't be there much longer. Word traveled fast in prisons, and though no one said it out loud, she could feel the shift in the air. That night, she walked the yard under the watch of 2 guards who kept a respectful distance. She paused at the chain-link fence, staring at the distant skyline of Raleigh, lights glittering in the cold dark. For the first time since her wrongful conviction, she felt the faint hum of possibility. Not freedom, not yet, but the direction of it. 3 days later, the paperwork came through. Her conviction was officially vacated. Kane arrived with a plain black coat to replace her jumpsuit and a simple bag holding the few civilian clothes she'd been allowed to keep. The release was quiet, almost anticlimactic. No press, no crowd, just the metallic clank of the gate and the cold bite of winter air on her face. She stood on the other side for a moment, Breathing it in, Kane was already at the curb, leaning against a nondescript sedan. "Where to?" he asked as she slid into the passenger seat. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere I can think." They drove without speaking much, the hum of the highway filling the silence. Eventually, he pulled into a small lakeside cabin 2 hours outside the city, a place owned by a friend who owed him a favor. It was basic, but clean. Wood walls, a fireplace, the smell of pine outside. When she stepped onto the deck, the lake was glass under the pale winter sun. No fences, no bars. Kane handed her a folded envelope. "My card's in there. And a number for someone at the bureau. If you want to keep fighting, they'll listen. If you want to disappear, I can make that happen too." She took it but didn't open it. "Right now, I just want to remember what it's like to breathe without checking over my shoulder." He gave a faint smile. "You've earned that." When he left, the quiet felt strange but not unwelcome. Alana stood on the deck until the sun dipped behind the trees, the cold deepening. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called across the water. She thought about her next steps, not in terms of survival, but in terms of choice. The battlefield was behind her, but there were still wars worth fighting. For the first time in years, the decision would be hers. The next morning, the lake was still under a thin veil of mist. Alana brewed coffee on the cabin's old stove, the rich aroma filling the space. She carried the mug outside, sitting on the steps with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. It was the first morning in years she'd woken up without the clang of metal doors or the echo of boots on concrete. The quiet felt almost fragile, as though any sharp movement might shatter it. Her mind, however, was anything but still. She replayed the trial, the verdicts, the faces of those still locked inside Blackthorn. She thought of Harper, the guard, who'd risked everything to get her message out, and the others who might never see justice. Midway through her coffee, she unfolded the envelope Kane had given her. Inside was his card and another plain white, with only a name and number. Underneath, a note in Kane's handwriting: "The fight doesn't have to end here." She traced the paper with her thumb, feeling the weight of it. The cabin, the lake, the peace. It was tempting. But her years in Delta Force had taught her something. Walking away could be as much of a choice as charging in. But both came with consequences. By evening, she had her answer. She picked up the phone. "This is Alana Briggs," she said when the line connected. "Tell me where I can do the most good." Thanks for watching this incredible journey of Alana Briggs, the wrongfully imprisoned Delta Force veteran who fought her way through one of the toughest and most dangerous prisons in America. From surviving the deadly corridors of Blackthorn to exposing corruption and reclaiming her freedom, Alana's story has been one of strength, resilience, and the refusal to be broken. We've seen her go from a battlefield overseas to a battlefield behind bars, and finally to the quiet of the cabin by the lake. But as we know, her mission isn't over. She's out there now, using her skills to protect others and fight for justice in places most people will never see. If you were inspired by her courage and determination, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. Drop a comment below. What was your favorite moment from Alana's journey? Which scene hit you the hardest? And if you want to see more stories like this, filled with action, drama, and characters who never give up no matter what the odds, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Thanks for watching.